My name is Melanie Rader. I'm from Kanab, Utah, and I ran Grand to Grand in 2023.
Nice. Well, it's good to have you on the show, Melanie. It's been a minute. I guess I saw you a few months ago, but it was good to meet you at Grand to Grand last year.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and actually, kind of met your boss via another podcast the other day.
I know. We've got a pretty good community of people doing really hard stuff out here. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun to see the community in Kanab because I don't think a lot of people think of Kanab as as far as athletic sports go, as this huge hub of this. But there's so many just kind of sleeper people in St. George or not in St. George in Kanab.
Yeah, in Kanab.
That do these amazing things
too. Yeah, it's a big playground with access to the North Rim and Bryce and Zion, and there's a lot of really rugged routes where it pays off to be able to do distance because water is a bit scarce out here. So if you can't cover ground, you have to carry a lot of weight. So I think it breeds a good community of people doing hard stuff at an efficient pace.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like the desert is one of those places where it's super fragile, but it'll also kill you in an instant if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about then why you ran Grand to Grand last year. You lived in Kanab now for a minute and you ran Grand to Grand and you completed it.
Yeah. So I moved here 6 years ago, and I was working at the Kanab Creek Bakery. That was my first job here in Kanab, and I worked for someone named Marjorie, and Marjorie ran Grand to Grand. Fast forward years later, I've been working at Dreamland Safari Tours, and Marjorie also works there. So I became the third person at Dreamland to finish Grand to Grand. We also had Mike McTeer, who was working there as well, who has run Grand to Grand. So there's a lot of buzz in my ear about it, and there's a lot of crossover in volunteers with King County Search and Rescue and Grand to Grand. So, I had heard a lot about it, and I had heard that there's a scholarship program that Grand to Grand offers for local folks. And I applied for it, and I felt like I was just kind of shooting my shot, and then I got it. And so it just, in some ways, it feels like it landed in my lap. But it was also a lot of work and a lot of training to execute it.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely makes sense. And are you traditionally a runner, or you just do a lot of hiking and that
Not
sort of
really.
thing?
I'm more of a backpacker. I like backpacking. In fact, I joke that I never planned on being a runner, but at a certain point in backpacking, I crested this threshold of 20-mile days. And then I was like, oh, well, if I start hiking at sunrise, I can do 30-mile days. And then ended up doing the Colorado Trail it was less than 2 years ago, so pretty recently. And it crossed my mind, how much can I do if I weren't wearing my backpack? I felt like I had my gear pretty dialed. So yeah, from there I started planning out a couple objectives, things like Buckskin Gulch, where you either backpack it or you have to run it in a full day, and some other Grand Canyon objectives where it's execution is key, but it seemed palatable to be able to do it in a day.
Yeah, it kind of seems like a common trend, at least from what I've seen recently, of people that maybe start in the outdoors backpacking and doing these longer trips, and well, if I want to go further and do more, maybe I can start earlier and then do more mileage. And then if I go lighter, then eventually kind of evolves into running, and it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah. I feel like it's a lot more tangible when you can talk to people about your backpacking trips and whatnot, but there's often a little bit of disconnect, and there's something really satisfying about having a tangible goal. The term ultra marathon is pretty widely recognized. And if you're oh, I'm training for a race, people are suddenly oh my gosh, that's incredible. And it turns out to be a really good platform for one, inviting people to do it, but also inviting, yourself to be kind of understood in what the heck you're doing out in the woods anyways.
Yeah, definitely. And it's honestly they're both fun. We're getting a little off topic here, but I love backpacking. I think it's super fun because you have to go out and experience this time under the stars over. But then I also love just cruising on a trail and just running shirtless with a handheld water bottle. It's awesome. They're both great.
Yeah, it's a totally different feeling.
Yeah. So let's talk about your training then going into Grand to Grand, because you said you don't really consider yourself a runner, but you are, and you ran Grand to Grand, which is a pretty long
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, I think for me training has a lot to do with consistency. Especially since I didn't have, you know, when I signed up for Grand to Grand, I'm trying to think. I would have received notice of my scholarship, I think in January. Grand to Grand is in September. So it's definitely enough time to train, but it's not enough time to start from like zero, at least in my perspective. So I try to lead a lifestyle, or I try to choose goals that integrate well into my lifestyle, and Grand to Grand really fit that bill. And a lot of my training just looked like I work as a hiking guide, which sounds like it would be a great way to train. It's not really. I spend a lot of time hiking, 1 mile per hour, taking a lot of pictures. It's a lot of varied terrain. Like I wear minimal footwear. I'm walking on rocks. I'm walking in sand. So there's definitely a benefit to that. But I had to integrate a lot of miles in my day to day in order to train. What I think was most important, or what the biggest shift in my training was doing consistent long runs. I set myself up with a goal of doing a 30-mile-ish run at least every week. And then when I was able to, I backed that up with a second day of comparable mileage with either significant elevation gain, a point of interest, or something that was within the course area of Grand to Grand.
Yeah, let's just real quick, like let's talk about the point
Yeah.
of interest part, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes running and just training can feel very like sloggy. It's like, okay, I'm going to go do 20, 30 miles a day. And like that's a lot to wrap your head around. But if you have some sort
Yeah.
of objective, like I'm going to go see like an archaeological site or something
Mhm.
beautiful, some overlook, like it really gives you some motivation to get out there, right?
Yeah, I think there's some finer piece in that where it's like you can choose goals that you can choose something that really challenges you, or you can choose something that kind of feeds your soul. And Grand to Grand got to be some kind of both. But I'm really fortunate to have a lifestyle that lends it, lifestyle and ambitions that just kind of lend towards that thing. Like I'm not going to go run on the roads. I'm not going to, there's most of the time a point of interest for me is like a landmark or a feature like that I can see when I'm at work, or that I can see out my window, or some sort of curiosity where I know there's not a road in between point A and point B. Um, and it keeps my objectives relevant to like what I'm interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, like I think a lot of people, I guess maybe we're both just very fortunate for like where we live. We're able to get outside very easily and be in these beautiful
Yeah,
places, and like no offense, people live in a city, but it's like it's so much harder to like, okay, to get out and to go see things. And maybe you do have to do concrete miles or pavement miles, and that's
definitely.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is okay. I don't think I would be the endurance like driven person that I am if I didn't live in this area. Um, and I'm really grateful that I don't have to travel for training.
Yeah, Kanab is such a great place for that, because like literally just right there in town. And obviously people when they come in for the race, they see that. It's like you drive in
Yeah,
and suddenly you're in Kanab and it's like, okay, there's trails right outside the park, like where we have the welcome dinner, and
right.
everything
Totally.
is just so close.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Yeah, and I still travel. Like I definitely, there's like to go to the south rim of Grand Canyon National Park. It's a 3-hour drive, and there are things I want to do over there. So I definitely travel, but it lends well towards that like lifestyle type of training where I get off work, I pack my bag, and then I go to sleep. My alarm goes off early. I throw my bag on and I head out the door, and I just don't have hours of travel in between when I need to cram training into my normal schedule. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. So let's kind of jump ahead then, I guess, to like your plan for the race. So you had essentially from January to September to prepare for it. And that's it seems like a long time, but also it's like, okay, that's a big race, a big event. And you have a lot
Yeah.
going on in your life. So like kind of what was your plan going into the race?
My plan was to go into the race and not spend a lot of money. So I and this totally pivoted throughout my 9-month period of getting ready for the race. So initially I was like, okay, I have the backpack I need. I've already done a lot of miles on it. I know what type of food I like to eat. And I felt like I had all this knowledge and skill. And I kind of went with that for 6 months. And about 6 months in, I realized my training was going really well. And I decided I should actually take myself seriously. This is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So from there, I started doing gear upgrades, which is like, for me, buying gear is, it involves a lot of research. It's a very meticulous process. But yeah, by honing in my gear was a really big milestone for me, and being like, I eliminated over a pound of weight from my backpack with my gear upgrades. And that was, yeah, before that, I was just planning on, doing my best and just trying to show up with what I had. And I was like, oh, maybe I am a runner.
So what kind of gear upgrades did you do? Were there specific things you used or you bought to cut weight?
Yeah, so some of the biggest ones were my sleep system. I upgraded my sleeping bag. My normal sleeping bag, it's ultralight. It's like a good weight. It is a mummy style bag. It's very versatile, and ultimately it exceeded the minimum rating required by Grand to Grand. And I have this local advantage where, I have a sense of what the weather's like, and I also know what it's like to suffer and kind of what it's like to sleep cold out here. I've got way too much experience doing that. So I got to kind of think about what I was comfortable with. Grand to Grand has some gear requirements. An insulated jacket is one of them. So I kind of upgraded my sleeping bag to a lightweight quilt. I upgraded my insulated jacket to one with a hood, and really worked to integrate the required gear from Grand to Grand as to being like a complete system, rather than just things that I had on hand that were light enough for me to carry with me.
Yeah, just real quick then, like,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're saying there is the warmth requirement, like for your sleeping
Mm-hmm.
bag and stuff at Grand to Grand, but like, what's the difference between a quilt and a sleeping bag?
Yeah, so there's a learning curve involved. It's pretty different. So a quilt is going to be a quilt. Well, my quilt doesn't have a zipper. Instead, it has a clasp closure system, and it integrates with my sleeping pad. My sleeping pad is insulated. And then it also doesn't have a hood, so that's where the hooded jacket came in. Whereas, like, my sleeping bag is entirely plug and play. Something that I considered when making that change is like, okay, this means I'm committing to like setting up my sleep system every night. Which in reality, that makes sense. Grand to Grand has cutoff times. The cutoff times allow you to have a bit of time before one would reasonably go to bed. And it was like, when I thought about it, I was like, okay, I'm not just going to be like throwing my bedding out on the ground in the desert. Like, I can dedicate that time to self-care and to that routine of setting up my sleep system. It takes a lot more care to set it up and to be warm. And I feel like we were pretty lucky with weather. We had a couple of cold nights, but at no point was the sleep system I switched to inadequate. And that part of that's just a gamble. You never know. It can be really hot and it can be really cold out here.
Yeah, and that makes it a little difficult, huh? Like I forgot what race I was looking at recently, but it was just hot the whole time. And so you can just pack a lot less because you don't have to have as much warmth and your jacket can be lighter and different things. But when it's a hot race and also a cold race at night, like, yeah, like it's a little more complicated, I guess, to plan things out gear wise.
Yeah, I will say that I like wholeheartedly appreciate the minimum gear requirements that Grand to Grand provides, and part of that is like I do backpacking, guiding, I do search and rescue, and like I spend a lot of time out here. And it's like if we had a bunch of people who were just trying to push their limits, it'd be pretty scary to not have those healthy requirements for gear. I
Yeah.
use my emergency blanket, which is something that I typically do on my personal trips. Grand to Grand does require that you carry some sort of like emergency blanket, and normally when I'm pushing my limits on my own trips, I am using my emergency blanket in conjunction with my sleep setup. Really piecing together every little piece of gear. So I think that's where I was lucky, is I was like considering that part of my sleep setup one.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Like, it's nice to have those rules to at least give some guidance and stuff. And because I don't know, like sometimes I like to go too lightweight and then I end up suffering too much, and it's kind of miserable.
Yeah, I did bring a blow-up sleeping pad, which was really a great idea. I think that the event does a really good job of choosing tent sites, but the reality of it is that we live in an area that has like an abundance of sagebrush, and um, you know, choosing flat ground is a virtue. It's not always the way things actually play out. So, and in sharing a tent, towards the end of the race, I ended up moving a lot slower than I would have ever anticipated. And yeah, it was really nice to be able to sleep on uneven ground and still get a full night of sleep.
Yeah, definitely. And there's just so many benefits to that besides just feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about gear then. Like before we started recording, we're just talking about how like things can be like multi-purpose. Like a camp shoe, for example, can be used like at camp, but maybe other things or whatever. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I I love multi-purpose. I think it's a really great way of approaching honing in your gear that you want for any type of adventure, but especially like Grand to Grand. You mentioned shoes. I think one of my biggest obstacles I ended up with during Grand to Grand is I had really bad blisters. I The only thing that I can really attribute to that is, I had been training in my shoes and I just didn't notice that I was at a point where actually that footwear wasn't working for me anymore. The footwear worked great for me for, a year. And at some point along the way, I was probably so fixated on training for Grand to Grand, honing in my gear. I decided footwear was not an issue, that I missed a point where actually my footwear became an issue. I did pack camp shoes, and this is a huge contemplation for me. I was torn between just having some sort of flip flop or I don't know, some sort of like really lightweight, let's say like hotel shoe style camp shoe. And hey, amazing.
Is that your pup there?
Yeah, she's tackling the pillows. And I on the recommendation of Dina, who is she's a Grand to Grand alum. She's run twice. She did the entire event in her Chacos one year. And I was talking with her about shoes because she was kind of a mentor for me. She's local and, she's run the race before. And she was talking about how the camp shoes she's bringing are shoes that she knows she could also do the event in. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I knew blisters were a really big problem at Grand to Grand. For some reason, I just wasn't. I mean, I understand why I didn't think it was going to be a problem for me because I was used to the terrain, but it was a huge issue on day 3. So the 53-mile stage. I think it was just after I can't remember if it was the first or the second checkpoint, but I transitioned from running in my running shoes to running in my sandals, and I ended up finishing the race in my sandals. And yeah, if I had to keep wearing my shoes, it would have become a concern. Like I would have likely lost enough skin or had open wounds to the point where it wouldn't have been wise for me to continue. So multi-purpose. If you're going to carry shoes, make sure they're versatile. That's my advice. I think there's a lot of really lightweight sandals that provide that are suitable for this terrain. My sandals have Vibram soles, so they have pretty good grip. And at that point, it was like, cool, I switched into my sandals and I just needed to be really aware to not kick a cactus and to be aware where I was placing my feet. But I was familiar with them and I knew that was something that I was going to have, with that compromise, that was something I was going to have to do.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes a lot of sense. And I guess like that dual purposing can apply to like your sleep system as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, my jacket supports my sleep system. And, I also like figured I knew on the long stage I was going to be likely running in the dark and that I was going to need to be able to be warm for when you're running hard and it's dark out and you're like eating everything you can, you get really cold. Like, running only keeps you warm when you're moving. As soon as you stop, your body like is like, what are we doing? So like being able to throw my quilt on when I like decided to take my longer break and eat my dinner during the long stage was awesome. And just really trying to think about like when things go wrong, how is your gear gonna support you in that? I think part of my approach was I was planning on things going wrong. I was planning on being nauseous. I knew what my food plan was going to look like if I was struggling with solid food. I knew what my footwear was going to look like if my shoes tore, or like I got blisters. I knew what that was going to look like. If I was sleeping cold, I knew what using everything together would look like in the most efficient manner. And it gave me so much comfort when things did go wrong, that I knew that wasn't going to be a critical point in my race.
Yeah, so how do you like formulate a plan for like, say you have your plan A, like I'm going to run in this or I'm going to sleep in this, but then how do you create like a plan B for that situation without overpacking too much? Because I think like for myself, it'd be really easy to be like, I'll bring an extra sleeping bag or an extra jacket or something.
Yeah, I think there's a huge experience component that goes into that. In my training, I did try to do a lot of back-to-back long run days. And in that, I camped near my car, but outside of my car. My car was there to support me with holding water, but camped outside my car. I used my sleep system. I was camping at high elevations and cold temperatures. And I built a really strong relationship with using everything I had and understanding that my gear was going to support me, and that yeah, you're not going to die. It's you're if you're smart and logical, like temperature ratings on sleeping equipment are a really good place to kind of challenge what does it look like to follow those manufacturer suggestions. When they give you a temperature rating, what are they anticipating that you're wearing? Cool. Do you actually have the base layers to like meet that temperature rating? Do you actually have the insulated like hat that a temperature rating suggests when you buy a sleeping bag? And what does it take? And like being comfortable with the fact that like, yeah, a hat is something I can use while I'm running. And like really, if you can only use something in one scenario, you need to cut it out. And if you're bringing a lot of clothing that you can't wear all at the same time, then it's time to think about something different. But it involved a lot of trial and error with what I currently had, and a lot of just putting my gear to the test.
Do you enjoy that aspect of like planning and testing and trialing things like out on training runs?
Yeah. Yeah, it's my favorite. I love giving feedback on gear. Any chance I have the opportunity to like collaborate and like engage with the brand on like how a product is performing, I'm like, yes. Like, I know. Yeah. I put your pants through unreasonable stress and I put a tear in them in one day, and like this is their weak spot. But like I also took them outside their use case. I really like thinking critically about how I'm using the products that I have. And I think that's pretty common in ultralight backpacking, or this like ultralight, like fast packing mentality, is you're taking gear outside of its use case. So you need to be really mindful of how it's not expected to perform and really try and use it to its own strengths. Like my sandals, they're not made to run 100+ miles on them. But I know that as long as I'm reducing my impact, I'm setting myself up for like I have reasonable expectations for their performance. They're not going to perform like a running shoe. They just don't have that type of cushioning. They don't have that type of foot protection. And like I had to put sunscreen on my feet. So like really just roll with the punches, but know that you're setting yourself up for success by thinking really critically in your gear choices.
Yeah, I think that's a huge takeaway with things is like experimenting with things. And then you kind of almost like just by experimenting with things, and maybe you don't have an ideal run or whatever, but you're going to learn a lot. And then when those situations arise where it's not ideal and you're feeling a little flustered, it's like, oh yeah, like I remember doing this while I was on a training run. And then you can apply those things for like the rest of the week. And in your case, like it helped you finish the race versus potentially dropping out.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of this like stuff in my head where I'm like, well, this isn't as bad as that night. You know? And like that helps. Like knowing that you're tough, knowing that you can get through it. That when you wake up in the morning, that sun's gonna come up and it's gonna feel warm, and you may be frustrated now, but once you start walking, things feel better, you know? And prepare yourself for the discomfort of those first couple miles of every day. It's always hard, but that'd be hard even if you were doing the same thing at home. Like if you set yourself up for big mileage back-to-back days, those first miles are going to be hard no matter what. That's not because you're in the desert. That's just because of that's what it's like.
Yeah, everyone definitely goes through that, whether the elites or like just an average runner. Like we all start off kind of slow that next day because it's hard on your body. It's hard to get kind of back in that groove.
Easy.
Yeah.
I want to be like, oh, I did everything right and just run free, but that's just not how it works.
Yeah, especially when you're doing something hard and difficult day in and day out. Like it's not like it's a walk in the park, and there's a reason why not everybody does something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. When I was a few years ago, I was in Iceland on a work shoot on a production, and it rained the entire time. It's beautiful, obviously. It was really pretty, but I was just kind of getting annoyed because I'm like, oh, I've been cold for 5 days, and my cameras are just soaking wet, and I'm like, I'm probably gonna destroy all these things.
Yeah.
And our medical director there, she was super cool, and we were just talking. We were hiking back to a trailhead or something. She's like, I was like, aren't you kind of annoyed right now that it's so rainy? She's like, honestly, she's like, we'll be back at the car in 15 minutes, and then we're going to go get lunch. And then I just think about that. It's like, it's so temporary. And like, and when she said that, I was like, that is the most, like, it just makes sense. Like, it's so common sense. But having her say that to me, I was like, oh, you're so right. And so I try to apply that now when I'm doing things, whether I'm on like a really awful run or a ride or something. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is temporary. Like within an hour or two, I'll be back in my truck or my car or home or whatever and just be totally fine. And yeah.
And Derek, on that note, like I can't emphasize enough how lucky, like I feel really fortunate that I was racing with people that I knew. We had a handful of people from Kanab who were running last year, but like it's so important to lead by example and what you need your dialogues to look like. Like it's so easy to sit at camp and talk about how everything sucks all the time. And I feel like that's such a disservice to the effort it takes to just get to the start line of this event. And I felt really fortunate to like kind of have my community of people who were like, this is hard, but this is awesome. You know, this is hard. This is what I signed up for, was like a theme for me. And I recommend finding people like that, because that's the reality of doing hard things.
Yeah. Like
Awesome.
Yeah, that's very true. Like I think sometimes it's easy to get kind of amped up and motivated by watching a video and like, yeah, I'm going to do this and it's just going to be fun the whole time. But in reality, like it's type 2 fun where like, yeah, in the moment it's hard and brutal, but it's also very rewarding and enjoyable, especially when you look back on it and it makes you want to do these things over and over.
Absolutely. And I really enjoy looking at my pictures from the event because it's like, oh my gosh, I was miserable, but I was also having such a good time. It's like I worked so hard to suffer like that, and it was good.
Yeah, and that kind of just rolls back to what you were saying at the beginning, how it's a once in a lifetime experience, like for you and for a lot of people. And if you're going to come out here and spend all this time training and race during the week and just be grumpy about it, it's like, oh man, like you missed out on so many like great opportunities to meet other people and just have a good experience.
Yeah, so what it means to do it wholeheartedly is to follow through even when it's hard. And it's going to be hard. The whole thing's going to be hard. And that's why it's so awesome.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So as we kind of wrap up here then, Mel, like what is one good tip or piece of advice you'd give to somebody that's either signed up for this year or potentially going to sign up?
My biggest piece of advice is it's so generic, but like have fun with it. But really think critically about what it means to have fun. What does it mean to choose training objectives that fill your cup? And what does it mean to choose like gear that you love and you like you have faith in like full heartedly? And what does it like how can you integrate these big objectives to be something that benefits you in a really well-rounded way? I think it's really easy to be bogged down by training and discomfort and you know what can you do to navigate that and keep the stoke going, because these sorts of objectives are incredible, and an event like Grand to Grand sets up really good framework for it to be tangible. Like that staged race format lends a lot of opportunity to like work with that system.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So let's kind of wrap it up here. It was good to chat with you again. It's been a
Yeah.
minute, and have to go on a run sometime in Kanab.
Please, yeah, and I'm so excited. I'll be volunteering at Grand to Grand. I'll help sweep the long stage this year, and the long stage was a point where I got the closest to the cutoffs. So I feel like I get to kind of pay it forward by sweeping the long stage. And you know, if I see you out on the field on the long stage, let's chat. You know.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll definitely see you out there. The
Yeah,
long stage is my favorite to shoot, anyways.
yeah, yeah.
That's super beautiful. All right, well, thanks again. Let you get back to work. I know you got a million things going on in your life right now, but I do appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.